Welcome everybody, those of you in the room, those of you at home. My name is Aaron DeVore. I'm the chair in Transgender Studies, and this is part of our speaker series. We acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen-speaking peoples on whose traditional territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and the Saanich people, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. We are the first and only chair in transgender studies anywhere in the world, and we work to provide inspiration and hope to trans plus people. I'm using trans plus in the expansive sense of all the different people who might be trans, and to our allies everywhere. And we can contribute with things like this and many other activities to the development and communication of accurate, research-based, and real-world knowledge about trans plus people that can be used to improve the world and make better policies and laws and drive social change. We help to build strong and resilient, I hope, trans plus communities through social and cultural events. And in all that we do, we are committed to applying an intersectional lens in our work to advance reconciliation, racial justice, equity, and inclusion for all. And in addition to today's events like today, we provide many other services. The main ones that I want to mention are the Transgender Archives, which is here in the McPherson Library, on the ground floor. And that's the largest collection anywhere in the world of original material that historians use to write the history of trans people. We also run the international, interdisciplinary, and intergenerational Moving Trans History Forward conferences. And you've seen scholarships and fellowships, arts and cultural events. Our speaker of the day that you all came to hear, you didn't come to hear me, is Jess Gibbard. So let me give a short bio on Jess, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. So over the past several years, Jess has been actively working as a voice coach for binary and non-binary trans plus people with a specialization in voice feminization, and they have helped many people to begin their personal voice journeys. She has a long history with voice. She's always held a deep fascination for the production and manipulation of speech and sound, and is currently studying in a BSc in linguistics here at UVic. Jess has aspirations to pursue an MSc in speech language pathology at the University of British Columbia when she finishes her BSc here at UVic. So please join me in welcoming Jess Gibbard.
Thank you so much, everyone. So we're going to be talking about voice today. We are going to be talking a lot about some entry-level voice topics. We're going to be doing a lot of vocal work together as a collective too. So we're going to be trying to not only understand the concepts that we're talking about, but also put them into practice. So I'm going to encourage everybody here in this room today to be using your voices. I want you actively making these sounds as we talk about them. To those of you at home, I would also encourage that. It's not going to come across the same, I'm sure, because you're at home and it's muted on, all those ends. But hopefully you can hear the people behind me, and that'll make it sound a little bit more, full with the class. So what we're going to be doing to start is just a little bit of an introduction to the concepts we're going to be talking about, followed by some warm-ups. Afterwards, we're going to be defining and explaining what these concepts actually are, how we can begin using them, and then we'll start talking about the exercises, so actually putting them into practice. Following that, I'll just be tossing it up to you guys. So questions. I'll be checking the chat at the end. I'm not going to be actively checking it during the presentation, and then I'll be grabbing a couple hands from the room, I'm sure. Alrighty, so first of all, I really want to say thank you to everyone who has come here. It is absolutely astonishing to me the amount of participation that I'm seeing, just like in this room here, and also just in the amount of people who registered and who are currently still pooling into the room. We're still having people being admitted. And I just, from the bottom of my heart, want to say thank you. So let's get into it. Really quickly, before we do though, I want to talk health and safety. Anytime we're doing any type of vocal alteration that you are not familiar with, there is some degree of risk involved. Now, the degree of risk with this is fairly minimal, and if done properly, should be next to 0. But I do still want to mention it. If at any point during any of these exercises you feel strain or pain, that is not normal, and I want you to stop what you're doing immediately, right? We don't want to put you at potential risk of causing vocal damage. Now, once or twice having felt that, you're probably not going to be at that risk, but over longer periods of time, right? So just being aware of that. That being said, the sounds we're going to be making today, a lot of people here might not have ever made these sounds before, right? If that's the case, it might be difficult. I want to make it very clear that difficulty does not equate to that strain or pain, right? Difficulty can oftentimes lead to it if done improperly, but if you're giving yourself that proper time and space to really listen to your body, you shouldn't be encountering any of those sorts of hurdles. So yeah, just being aware of that. What we're going to do now, though, is to try and make sure nobody encounters that. We're going to get ourselves warmed up. So we're going to start just some nice deep breathing exercises. What I want everybody to do is nice in through the nose, out through the mouth. We're going to do 3 of these, and I'm just going to count you all in. So here we go. First one, 3, 2, 1, go. One more. Last one. Perfect. So when we're making these sounds today, it should never be more difficult than it is to breathe, right? Keep that in mind, right? There should be no degree of tension involved in your voice while we're producing these sounds, right? It should be as nice and loose and relaxed as breathing. Let's warm up our vocal folds now, right? We want to get that vocal tract fully engaging. What we're going to do this is we're going to do some lip trills. For those of you who have never done any lip trills before, what we're going to be doing is taking our lips, closing them, taking our teeth, closing them as well, resting the tongue gently in the lower portion of your mouth, and then exhaling. You should get a sound similar to this. On the count of 3, I want everyone making this sound with me. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Now, some people may struggle making that sound. If that's you, there's a couple things you can do in replace of that. You could be doing a tongue trill. It's where you take your tongue and stick it up against the top portion of your mouth that gets burned when you bite into a slice of pizza that's too hot, and then try to exhale through that. You should get a sort of sound. Alternatively, if you can't produce that sound, just hum. Any of those will work. Now what we're going to do is we're going to try and scale that sound. So we're going to start applying phonation to it. That's the engagement and activation of our vocal folds. So we're going to be making that full tone. And then we're going to be applying a scalar quality to it. Right? So making it a little bit more musical and actually involving our vocal tract to its fullest. Let's go ahead. Everyone, I want you doing that along with me. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Perfect. We're going to do 2 more of those. Count of 3. 3, 2, 1. Awesome. And one last time. 3, 2, 1. Perfect. We should all be nice and warmed up now. We can start talking about some definitions. So the way this is structured is we're going to be doing a lot of explanations before we do the physical exploring of these sounds, because I really want to make sure everybody understands how these are actually produced, right? So we're going to dissect this into 3 different concepts. We're going to be talking about a sound production model. This is the power source filter model. We're going to be talking about vocal tract terms that are key to using in voice alteration. So that's going to be the larynx, the vocal folds, the tongue, and the lips. And we're going to be talking sound production terms. So this is things like pitch, harmonics, resonance, and vocal weight. If you don't know what any of those are, that's perfectly okay. We're going to be unpacking those. So let's start with the sound production model. When we produce a sound, there are 3 stages to the production of that sound. It starts in the lungs, right? Either inhalation or exhalation, right? Right? We need to make that movement to produce the sound. Second stage is going to be the source. This is the part of the vocal tract that is producing the initial sound. In this case, it's the vocal folds, right? What happens is as that air is rushing through, the vocal folds will begin to make contact amongst one another. That contact chops up the air and produces an audible sound. The last stage of this is the filter. What the filter is responsible for is reshaping that sound into other tones, right? A very simple way of looking at the filter would be to think about your tongue in relation to vowel sounds. I want everyone to try and make that change now. Just switch between an ah and an e sound. Go. What you should notice is that as you're making that change up to the E sound, the tongue is rising in the mouth, right? So we're getting a change in the overall size of the vocal tract, a change in the filter, right? Analogous to this would be an acoustic guitar and a violin, right? Let's say you've got these 2 instruments, right? You have, with the acoustic guitar, you're strumming. That's your power, the movement of the arm, right? The source is going to be the string, the vibration of the string, and the filter is going to be the acoustic chamber, the body of the guitar, right? Same with the violin. The power is moving your arm for the bow. The source, again, is the string being bowed against it, and that filter is the body, right? Now, the acoustic guitar and the violin are going to sound different from each other, so we're going to circle back to this in the next slide here. Or not this one, but the one after. So keep that in the back of your mind. So now let's define some of these vocal tract terms, right? Inside the vocal tract, we have a few key components that we need to understand in order to begin doing some of this work. We need to be able to identify our larynx, be able to know where the vocal folds are situated, and be able to identify the tongue and the lips. Now, the last 2 there, I think most people should be able to identify, no problem. But that first one, the larynx, I want everyone to take their hand, very gently place it on your neck, and I want you to exhale. And now I want you to hum. Do you feel that vibration? So that vibration is the vocal folds vibrating through the larynx. So that massive cartilage that you may be able to feel is the larynx, and the vocal folds are housed inside of that, right? So these are the primary components of our vocal tract for what we're going to be talking about, right? The vocal folds are the thing producing the sound. The tongue, the lips, and the larynx will be the filters of the sound. So let's define some of these sound production terms. This is where it starts to get a little bit more in depth. So I'm going to do my best to make sure that this is easily parsed, but people may have some questions about this. I'm hoping that, you know, if you do, just raise your hand now. So with regards to pitch, we've got a little slide here off to the side. For those of you here, it's right there. This line right here, the bottom line, that line is going to be our pitch indicator, right? Pitch is going to be the primary function of that vocal fold contact, right? When we produce a pitch, what it's representing is how many times per second the vocal folds are making contact. In this case, we can see that the pitch is around 220 hertz, which means that the vocal folds are contacting each other 220 times per second, roughly. What we see above this is a set of harmonics, though, right? And this is where the primary sound characteristics of a voice come from. Otherwise, we would have a simple sine wave tone, right? Very, very simple, basic sound. So this here is deriving pitch information, and all of that above it, sorry for those of you who can't see on the computer, but all of those things above that blue line at the bottom, that is the vocal characteristics, right? That's all harmonics. What resonance is these lines that have colored highlightings in between those harmonics, right? Now, they're in between, but they're actually technically not, right? Those lines that are showing the harmonics and showing the resonances are going to have distinct overlap. right? This is just trying to approximate the resonances. So we would say that that resonance in that screenshot there has an R1 value, right? The first resonance, that lime green line, that would be the R1, right? The R2 would be the teal green line, that second one above the pitch. R3 would be red, and R4 would be purple. Those resonances are really, really important in being able to start identifying sounds. I'm going to pull it back to that acoustic guitar and violin analogy. When both of those two play the exact same note, the exact same pitch, which one sounds brighter?
Violin.
Violin. Yeah, the violin sounds brighter because it has higher overall resonance, right? So the harmonic structure may be similar, maybe a little bit different, but the resonance is going to be substantially different, right? In an acoustic guitar where we might see an R1 value of, I actually don't know what the values are, but let's ballpark it. Let's say with our voice, if we're seeing an R1 value on an atone of around 700 hertz, that's a relatively low R1 resonance. If we're seeing an R1 resonance on an atone around 1200 hertz, it's relatively high. And that's what's going to make a voice sound characteristically masculine or feminine, is the position of those resonances, specifically R1 and R2. Yeah, so that's kind of the beginnings of understanding these. So here we've got a little graph showing all of the different characteristics that we just talked about in relation to masculinized, androgynized, and feminized speech. As we can see here, these are averages, right? These are not one-to-one, and you can have multiple of different combinations here. But typically speaking, masculine voices tend to have a low to mid pitch range with a darker resonance and a thicker vocal weight. I actually forgot to explain vocal weight on the last slide, I'm so sorry. Essentially, vocal weight is a measure of intensity of contact and length of contact of the vocal folds, right? We can take a clapping analogy here. If I'm clapping gently like this, right, it's a very soft clapping sound. This would be a soft vocal weight. And as I begin to increase that, right, we can hear a stronger, thicker vocal weight. So if we're changing resonance, we would get a change in this tone. Right, you can hear it's getting darker. If we're changing pitch, you get a change in You can hear that musicality of it. And if we're changing weight, you're going to hear a change in intensity. So you can hear it gets buzzier, louder, right? So when we say a masculine tone is low to mid pitch with a darker resonance and a thicker vocal weight,
what we mean is that a masculine voice will have more of this sort of quality to it. So it's going to be darker overall, stronger, thicker vocal fold contact, and it's going to have a slightly lower pitch, but also potentially mid, right? All three of those can be in the mid section. An androgynous tone could be something more along the lines of this tone here, right? We have a mid-range pitch still, mid-range resonance, and a mid-range vocal weight, right? They're quite similar. And then a feminized sound would be this one, with a mid to high range pitch, bright resonance, and a soft, thin vocal weight. If I really, really, really soften the vocal weight, it's going to be this type of sound, right? Very, very, very delicate. You can see that reflected here, right? We've got a little graph showing a transition from the dark space to the bright space on the y-axis, right? So that's resonance. And we're seeing a transition from the thick to the thin space, so vocal weight on the x-axis. In the top right-hand section, we've got a bright resonance with a thin vocal weight. That's going to be the stereotypical feminine sound. And then again, in that lower section, the lower right-hand side, we've got a thick weight and a dark resonance. That's going to be a more stereotypical masculine sound.
We've also got two other quadrants here, right?
That would be this tone here in the bottom left, thin weight with a dark resonance.
And that would be this tone here, up in the top right, bright resonance and a thick weight, right? What you might notice is that those two sound a little bit less common, right? They're almost kind of a bit more cartoony, almost like a Patrick Star and a SpongeBob voice, right? Those voices do exist, right? People do have those voices, but they do tend to be far less common. The vast majority of people's voices will fall somewhere on a line separating between the bright and thin and the thick and dark, right? So now we're going to jump into some exercises with all of that conceptual understanding out of the way, right? So we're going to start with a really short, quick pitch exercise, and then we're going to start moving into some of the more useful ones. Now I say useful because as we saw in one of those previous slides, pitch can be low to mid for masculine, it can be mid to androgynous, mid for androgynous, it can be mid to high for feminine, right? Mid works on all of them. Mid-range pitches, very, very, overlapping. Most vocal identification is done through information in vocal weight and resonance as far as gender is concerned. Pitch carries very little information, right? If I have a high pitch, but I'm making this sort of sound, it's still going to sound a little bit more masculine. If I have a lower pitch down here, it's still going to sound more feminine, right? Those two sounds, they're very, very different from one another too, right? But pitch is not really influencing that tone. So we're going to start with pitch just to warm people up a bit more, but don't worry too much about pitch. It's not a big thing. Then we're going to be moving on to vocal weight and then on to resonance. So let's recap from the initial warm-up. We're going to be doing some lip trill work again, right? So begin trilling these lips first without phonation, then we're going to introduce phonation. We're going to scale up by a fifth, just like we did with the initial warm-up. After we're done that, we're going to release the trill though, so we're not going to go back down. We're going to release the trill and hold our pitch for several seconds. And then we're going to try and speak at the higher pitch. What this is going to sound like is like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, check, check, check. Right? I'm just trying to sustain that tone up in the higher pitch range that I just found. Right? You can hear that it's a lot higher than what I usually talk about. So we're all going to try and do that together, starting without the phonation in the trill, warming up the lips, scaling up 5 tones, right? Then releasing it, holding it in place like that, right? And then we're going to just try and talk through it. All right, everybody? All good? Awesome. When we count 3, let's do this. 3, 2, 1, go. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, check, check, check. Yeah. So that's a pitch exercise there, right? There's a couple other variations of pitch exercises that you can do. Some of them will involve scaling up a full octave, right? But again, pitch is not going to be the be-all, end-all of voice training, so don't stress yourself too much about it. Now, there are edge cases where it may be useful, right? If your voice is in the bass register and you're trying to bring it up into a more feminized position, it may help to try and bring it into a tenor or alto range. There's pretty substantial overlap there. Similarly, if you have a soprano voice and you're trying to bring it down into a more masculine range, it might be worth thinking about some pitch exercises, but by and large, pitch does not matter in the grand scheme of voice, so do not stress pitch. So we're going to be talking about vocal weight. Now we're going to spend a bit more time on weight than we did on pitch because vocal weight is rather important, right? As we saw in that other slide involving that space between weight and resonance, right? Makes a pretty substantial change in the sound. If I take this sound again and start to thicken up that tone, we get a bit more of this buzzy sound.
If I'm in a lower resonance position, we start to thicken up that tone, we still get like that more thickened, buzzy sound, right?
Makes a huge, huge change in the way that the voice is perceived as opposed to the right? So we're going to be doing a lot of work on weight here. We're going to first start by doing some weight thinning exercises, and then we're going to follow it up by doing some weight thickening exercises. Now, irrespective of whether or not someone is ideally going for a more feminine tone, a more androgynous tone, or a more masculine tone, I want everybody practicing every one of these exercises, right? They really, really help to do both, regardless of which way you're trying to change your voice. Having a broad spectrum access to both of these sounds is going to be incredibly beneficial, right? If you're only isolating one tone, you don't necessarily isolate it to its maximum extent. If you're isolating it only partially, right, you wouldn't know because you're not hearing that contrast. If you're able to hear the contrast of both tones, then you're going to be able to better identify how to make it further across into the desired tone. So what we're going to do to first start finding softer weight is by pretending to yawn. So I want everybody here to just think about how it is that your voice changes when you stretch out and you make a nice big oh. Yeah, right? Does everyone kind of feel that? It's a very soft and almost kind of lazy manner of production of sound, right? Changes a lot.
It's a very, very doughy sound.
What we're going to try to do is we're going to try to find this yawning space. And from there, we're going to speak out a couple vowel tones. Now we're going to be speaking out and ah, right? Got those three vowels written down there in a phonetic manner as well, in case anyone is struggling with the pronunciation of the non-phonetic versions. But we're going to be using those ones specifically because they allow for the voice to more easily produce the thinner sounds when we're first exploring these sounds. Comparatively, trying to make an E sound in that position might be a little bit challenging. But allows for a really nice full tone to be heard. So what I want everyone doing, stretching out, pretending to yawn, and then saying
And then trying to say, pass the salt.
Right, we're building up those vowel tones to put them into a sentence. All right, so let's try this together. Once you've said your vowel tones, then say pass the salt. Following that, try to continue speaking in that newly discovered tone. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1, go. Awesome. Yeah, so that's essentially the idea there. Now I heard someone in the audience say,
Hey, Peter.
and I wanna say that's actually a really good way to start exploring these sounds, is by mimicry, right? Finding example tones that fit these desired qualities and trying to use them, right? I've alluded to Patrick Starr as being a voice example, right? Yogi Bear would be another one.
Hey, boo-boo.
Right? Having a comparative voice to try and target is a really good way of exploring these sounds too, right? So if you're struggling with these, try using stuff like that. Try thinking about situations where other people might have softer voices and then try to mimic those, right? So that's how you can start exploring the thinned sound. We're going to move on now and try and explore the thickened sound. Oops. So this is tougher, right? Finding that thin tone is, for most people, quite easy. Finding a thicker tone can be rather challenging for a lot of people, right? This is going to be very important for people doing voice masculinization, right? Resonance is going to be important for that as well. But if you're trying to find this thicker tone, right, it can sometimes be very, very tricky initially. We're going to try to increase volume through a lip trill in order to find this, because as you've heard whenever I've demonstrated this sound, whenever I'm demonstrating the thick tone, there's a slight volume boost too, right? And that has to do with the intensity of the harmonics being produced. As we thicken the sound, right, we're increasing the harmonics. We're making them stronger, more present in the voice, right? Again, with that clapping analogy, right, you can hear the clap get louder. So as we're increasing that volume, you may stumble into the thickening sound. Now, weight and volume are not one-to-one, right? So just because you're louder does not mean you're thick, right? I can get quite loud with this tone, but it still remains a soft, thin tone, as opposed to this tone, which has that buzziness, right? We're trying to find the buzzy. So begin trying to find this through these sounds, but it will be challenging, right? It's going to be this difficult balance between just a volume boost and finding a thicker weight. So let's try to do this together. We're going to be using a lip trill again. So what we're going to do is we're going to go We can hear that as I'm going through that trill, right, the sound gets really sharp. Right? That sharpness is the change in weight. So we're going to try to target that. What we're going to do when we reach the pinnacle of that trill is we're going to open our mouths, hold that tone out for a second, and say ah, I, E. Right? These are going to be opposites to ah, right? They have a much smaller vowel space, right? The tongue is quite high in the mouth, and that height is going to help us try to target some of this sharpness, right? Ah, I, E. Now, it may result in some nasality for some people. For now, that's okay. We're not worried about nasality or about twang. We're just trying to initially find this thicker quality. So let's all try this together. We're going to go pass it, please. And then you're going to try and talk through this more thickened sound afterwards. All right, on the count of 3, here we go. 3, 2, 1, go. Yeah. Awesome. Now, a lot of you probably noticed that is tougher, right? Thickening a sound is a lot harder than it is to thin a sound, which is why this is so important for voice masculinization, right? If you're struggling to find that tone you're really liking, even if you're getting that lower resonant tone in a lower pitch, it's likely this weight issue. So definitely try targeting this. It can be really, really tough initially when you're starting to thicken these sounds, but if you practice it this way to start, you can definitely start to pick it up quickly. All right, we're going to move on now. Start talking a little bit about resonance. This is the big one. Resonance is by far the most important identifiable quality in a voice as far as gender is concerned, right? So we're going to be spending a good amount of time here. We're going to be going through 3 different resonance exercises. So we're going to be starting with what's called big dog, small dog. And this is going to help you begin to understand how you shape your resonance space in ways that go beyond using the vowel space, right? In the example I gave when we were first initially talking about resonance, we were talking about it in relation to tongue height, right? Now we're going to be talking about it in relation to laryngeal height, so height of the larynx, right? This makes the biggest difference in terms of the overall resonant sound of a voice. So what we're going to start doing to initially mimic this is by trying to do a little bit of this shifting of the sounds in our unphonated space, right? We're trying to mimic dogs panting to start feeling this change in the tones without the vocal folds being engaged, right? So let's all try this together. We'll start with the big dog, or I guess we'll start with the small dog rather. So try and mimic a whisper tone on an ah sound. Everyone try panting that way? Good. And now try to make the sound of like a husky or something larger, right? Right? All right, do this again, but place your fingers gently on your larynx, just like we did before. And now switch back and forth between the two. You should notice that as you're lowering that tone, the larynx is lowering in turn. Right? Should be able to feel that movement going down and back up. Right? I'll lift my chin up so you can really see it. All right. So now let's try doing this in a continuous motion, right? So a nice glide. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go. We're going to try that a couple times. Awesome. So what you're doing there is you're changing the resonance of your voice, right? Now, whispering is not always the easiest way to talk, right? Prolonged whispering can start to dry out your vocal folds. It's kind of quiet, you know, not exactly the best way to talk. So what we're going to try to do now is we're going to take that concept and begin applying it to phonated speech, right? So we're going to start with that big dog whisper sound. And just like we just did, we're going to try and glide it up into the small dog position. However, This time, once we reach the small dog position, what we're going to do is we're going to hold the tone for 2 seconds, right? And I want you physically counting this out on your hands. 2 seconds, right? The reason we're doing this is to try and acclimate our bodies to being in that position, right? We're trying to get accustomed to how it feels keeping the larynx at that height. What we're then going to try doing is we're going to begin phonating the sound on an ah tone. But we're not just going to do ah, we're actually going to aspirate it. So what that means is we're going to come in with a ha tone, as if you were saying hat without the T. The reason we're doing that is that that provides a seamless transition into the vowel. If you were to say ah, there's a chance that the larynx might drop during that time where it's not in use, right? Where there's no sound being produced. So we're going to try and do it like this, all in one motion. Ah. And then once you've found that tone, you're going to try and talk through it, right? Just try to sustain it. This is hard. This is really, really hard, right? Wait, relatively easy to initially begin exploring the space, but resonance is tough. If this does not come to you immediately, that is totally normal. This can take some people months to truly be able to put into a phonated context. That unphonated space, relatively easy to start exploring, but the phonated stuff is tougher. So please be kind to yourselves if it does not come right away, right? This can take a long time, but it is doable. Everyone has the ability to do this. With that being said, let's all give it our best shot. On the count of 3, I want everyone starting in that big dog sound, bringing it up to the small dog, holding it for 2 seconds, and then beginning to phonate a ha tone. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Good. Yeah. Now the other reason we're using ah specifically is because ah is the brightest vowel tone that we can produce relative to our R1 and R2 frequencies, right? So we're best able to hear this brightness reflected in the ah sound, right? Those 2 frequencies are going to be at their brightest, which means our resonance is going to be at its absolute brightest, right? So let's try this one more time, right? I really want to focus on these resonance ones. So let's do this one last time. Here we go. 3, 2, 1, go. Good. And now try to talk through it. Try to see if you can sustain it up in that position and talk. Awesome. All right. Let's reel it back in. So that's how you can start brightening the sound. So that's moving the sound into a more feminine position. Conversely, to darken the sound, as I'm sure you were imagining from the way that the weight exercise went, you're just going to do the opposite. So this time we're going to start in that small dog space and bringing it down into the big dog. What you'll notice again is that the larynx is dropping as we move into that big dog space, right? Once again, when we're at that apex, when we're in that valley, we're going to hold the tone for 2 seconds, and then we're going to begin phonating an O tone. Now, O is one of the darker vowels that we can produce relative to R1 and R2, so this is going to be easier to hear this change reflected this time, right? So just like last time, I saw a question. I can absolutely do it with you this time. Yeah, of course. Okay, so let's try this one out. Now, we're doing these, but the weights might not be exactly where they should be, or not even should. Should's not the right word. Where you want them to be, right? Some people might want them where they end up. Some people might not want them where they end up. That's okay for now as well, right? This is just beginning to explore these as independent concepts. So if you don't find the weight that you want with this resonance, that's okay, right? So keep that in mind too. Now, let's try finding this darker space. On the count of 3, I want everyone starting in that bright space, bringing it down to the dark space, holding it for a few seconds, and then we'll be trying to phonate it on an O tone. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Good. Does everyone notice the kind of change that was happening in the room there too? The room got a lot darker, right? The other sound was a lot brighter in the room. So I'm hearing that change from people here. Let's try doing this one more time, and this time we're going to try to talk through it, right? So we're just going to find that initial tone and then just try to say a sentence through it. It doesn't really matter what you're saying, just talk to yourself about whatever. On the count of 3, here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Oh, just like us, and then you're just gonna be talking in this position here, right? Trying to keep this darker position.
Yeah, perfect. All right. And that's how we're starting to begin exploring resonance, right? Now, resonance goes beyond this. There's a lot of other things that involve themselves in resonance, especially if you're doing voice feminization. If you're doing voice feminization, there's a whole other section of resonance that's exclusive to you guys. But this is kind of how you can begin starting to think about and how to explore these spaces, right? What we're going to try to do now is we're just going to try and combine some of these, right? So let's try to find a thin tone with a bright resonance. What we're going to do that is we're going to start by finding the thin sound first, and then we're going to scale the resonance up. All right. So what this is going to look like, it's going to.
Oh, I'm doing that stretch and finding a nice dark tone down here, right? Oh. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and go
Ha, 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 and see if I can maintain that quality of the thin sound when I bring that tone up. Right? So let's try that all together here. Just trying to put those two together. So first start by doing your stretch.
find that nice dark thin sound here. All right. And now let's all do that resonance version. So we're going to go.
And then we're going to try and hold this tone up here, right? See if you can find that brighter space that's nice and thin. Perfect. Yeah. Awesome. Perfect. All right. Let's bring it back in. So now we're going to try and do the other version. Let's try to find that stereotypical masculine tone. Okay. So we're going to start the same way. We're going to be starting in whatever your brightest space is, right? Wherever your natural brightness is. And then you're just going to be trying to thicken that tone. So
Check, 1, 2, 3. See if you can sustain that nice, dark, thick sound.
awesome. Yeah. So that would be putting them in tandem. Yeah. How's everyone feeling about this? It's a lot of information we just unpacked. Yeah, but that's essentially the basics of beginning to do some of this voice work, right? So it's really about exploring resonance, exploring weight, and to a lesser extent, exploring pitch, right? If you explore those sorts of sounds, you can find tons and tons of variation, right? As we can see here, there are similar graphs related to pitch and weight and pitch and resonance as well, right? So when we're finding our pitch with these, right? I said pitch doesn't have a lot of influence, but it does have some. A lot of that influence is going to be found in how accessible pitches are with those configurations, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that this is how the pitch is going to sound, but it's more reflective of what pitches are going to be easier to attain, right? As you can see, when we have a thin vocal weight, we tend to skew higher in the pitch, right? Tend to. It's a very important distinction, tend to. It is not one-to-one. And as you can see down below, right, when we get into a thicker position, it tends to skew lower. Again, not one-to-one. This is usually only to the tune of a couple semitones, right? So not a lot of pitch variation can be made from this, right? But there is a little. With resonance, however, we start to see a bigger distinction. Same sort of idea though. A bright resonance will be more attainable with higher pitches and vice versa. Same with the dark resonance, right? The dark resonance is going to help us find lower pitches. Just want everyone to try and explore this a little bit too before we dive into questions. But let's try doing this. So we're going to start in a dark resonance, right? And we're going to try and go high in pitch. So whatever your darkest resonance is, again, and whatever weight you want to use, it doesn't really matter for this. But try and bring it up, right? You're going to reach a point where it's hard to reach those higher tones. I want you to try and brighten your resonance once you get there. Right, you can hear I can go up quite a bit higher there. Yeah. There's a switch point where it's easier. All right, let's try doing the opposite now. So let's try and find some of those lower tones, right? Starting in a bright space, try to explore some of your low tones. You'll see that right here is where I start to cap out.
But if I make it darker,
I can get a few more tones out. Yeah. So again, it's not a huge change, right? There are some tones that are going to be more easily accessible in there as far as pitch goes, but as you can see, it's not a lot, right? This is a big reason why pitch is not the primary focus, but it does still affect the sound. So it's an important relationship to be aware of, right? Higher pitches are going to be more easily found in bright spaces and thin resonances, which is why stereotypically feminine voices tend to also have some slightly higher pitches, right? Conversely, dark resonances with thick vocal weights are going to be easier to find some lower pitches in, which is why, again, stereotypically, masculine voices will tend to have some slightly lower pitches in their average ranges. But the important thing is that this entire spectrum of sound can be explored by anybody, right? What happens to produce these changes tends to be exposure to testosterone, right? When someone goes through a testosterone-induced puberty, the vocal tract enlarges, right? The mass of cartilage in the larynx increases, and that causes it to drop along with an increase in the length of the vocal folds.
and that's what causes this initial drop here, right?
And then because it's easier to find some of those lower pitches, it then starts to become easier to produce them with a thicker weight.
For someone with a more femtone, right, it's likely that that person may not have been exposed to as much testosterone or any testosterone that was enough to affect that tone, right? Which is why they would have that, you know, thinner sound and brighter sound, because their vocal tract is physically smaller. There's less physical acoustic space like the violin, right? So that's going to have it in that brighter position. And because it's in the brighter position with a thinner weight, right, it's going to naturally gravitate to some higher pitches, right? But anyone can explore these, as we just explored all together, right? Irrespective of exposure to testosterone. You don't need to be on T to masculinize your voice. And if you've been exposed to testosterone, you can feminize your voice, right? So I implore everybody here to try in, you know, as much as you want with this. Cis, trans, non-binary, whatever, like play around with this stuff. It's fun, right? But yeah, that's gonna do it for today. I hope everybody has enjoyed this presentation.